Paul Bearer had four wrestlers he absolutely hated, and the stories behind it are pure fire. There's a lot of real heat here, so let's not drag this out any longer and jump right in. 1. The Ultimate Warrior. When Paul Bearer talked about wrestlers he truly could not stand, the Ultimate Warrior was always near the top of that list. Their history went way back to the world-class championship wrestling days, long before Warrior became a larger-than-life character in the WWF. At that time, he was still known as Dingo Warrior or Jim Hellwig. Percy Pringle, who later became Paul Bearer, was managing him and saw firsthand what he was really like behind the bright face paint and intense energy. And from the start, Moody did not like what he saw. One of the biggest issues was Warrior's attitude. Moody always said that Warrior walked into the locker room acting like he had already made it, even though he was still very new and still learning how to work. Moody came from a time when respect was everything in wrestling. You shook hands, you listened, you learned. According to Moody, Warrior did none of that. He was focused only on himself and on building his look. Moody felt that Warrior did not care about the people around him or about becoming better in the ring. He cared only about how big he could get and how big he could look. Moody talked many times about Warrior's in-ring ability, or in his opinion, the lack of it. He said Warrior was powerful and intense, but he was not skilled. He did not understand pacing. He did not understand storytelling. He did not know how to work long matches. Moody said that if anything went off plan or if Warrior got tired, the match would fall apart because Warrior had no idea how to adjust. To Moody, it felt like Warrior relied completely on his look and energy instead of actually learning the craft. And that bothered him because Moody respected wrestling too much to accept that kind of laziness. Another thing that fueled the dislike was Warrior's behavior backstage. Moody often described him as unprofessional and difficult. He said Warrior would miss cues, show up late, or disappear when people needed him. And when people tried to criticize him or help him improve, Warrior did not want to hear it. Moody believed Warrior truly thought he was above everyone else. That attitude clashed hard with Moody's personality. Moody was a veteran, respected and trusted by many, and he could not stand someone who acted bigger than the business. Moody also noticed that Warrior treated people differently depending on whether he saw value in them. If Warrior felt someone was useful for his career, he would be polite. If not, he ignored them. Moody thought that was one of the worst qualities a wrestler could have. He believed that wrestling was a brotherhood and that everyone mattered. Seeing Warrior behave the complete opposite of that made Moody resent him even more. Over time, that early frustration turned into long-lasting dislike. Even years later, when both men had moved on, Moody still talked openly and honestly about how he felt. He never softened his opinion. To him, Warrior was someone who had all the tools to be great, but chose ego over learning and attitude over teamwork. And for Paul Bearer, that was something he simply could never forgive. 2. Lex Luger. When Paul Bearer looked back on the wrestlers he managed early in his career, Lex Luger was someone he always spoke about with a mix of frustration and disappointment. At that time, Paul Bearer was still known as Percy Pringle III, and he worked closely with Luger in world-class championship wrestling. Luger was young, still fresh in the business, but already being pushed as a future star because of his incredible body and his look. And right from the start, Moody felt that Luger acted like he was way above everyone else. One of the biggest issues for Moody was Luger's attitude. He always said that Luger walked into WCCW acting like a finished superstar instead of a rookie who still needed to learn a lot. Moody believed that Luger carried himself with a sense of entitlement. It felt like Luger expected success to come to him simply because he looked like a pro wrestler. In Moody's eyes, Luger did not respect the long journey that most wrestlers went through to earn their place. He thought Luger skipped steps and still wanted the same level of praise as people who had paid their dues for years. Moody talked about how Luger often came off as arrogant. He said Luger rarely showed interest in taking advice, even when it came from experienced wrestlers who wanted to help him grow. Moody had seen many young talents come in hungry and humble, excited to learn from veterans. But with Luger, the hunger felt one-sided. He wanted to be pushed, he wanted the spotlight, and he wanted to be seen as a main event guy. But Moody felt that he did not want to do the hard work that normally comes with that position. That bothered Moody a lot because he believed strongly in respect and effort. Another thing Moody disliked was that Luger seemed more focused on maintaining his image than improving his actual ability. Luger had an amazing physique, and everyone noticed it. Moody admitted that the look was part of what made Luger valuable, but he also believed that wrestling was more than muscles. It was timing, psychology, emotion, and connection with the audience. He felt that Luger did not understand that. Moody often said Luger was too busy being Lex Luger, the bodybuilder, instead of Lex Luger, the professional wrestler. And when someone thinks the look is enough, Moody believed it created a dangerous level of overconfidence. Backstage, Moody said Luger could be distant and sometimes difficult. He was polite when he wanted to be, but he also had moments where he acted like he was too important to be bothered. Moody saw him ignore people, walk past veterans without greeting them, or act like certain tasks were beneath him. These may sound like small things, but in wrestling they matter a lot. The locker room is built on respect and unity, and Moody felt Luger was missing those qualities. Over time, these experiences shaped Moody's opinion deeply. Even after Luger grew older and became more mature, Moody still remembered the early days when the ego was loud and the humility was missing. And for Paul Bearer, that first impression never faded. 3. Steve Austin. Steve Austin is one of those names Paul Bearer always had an interesting story about. Before Austin became Stone Cold and changed the entire wrestling business, he was a young talent trying to climb his way up in world-class championship wrestling. Paul Bearer, still known as Percy Pringle, the third back then, watched Austin closely during those early years. And while Moody always respected what Austin eventually became, he was very honest about the fact that the early version of Austin was not someone he enjoyed dealing with. Moody often said that Austin came into the territory with a confidence that felt a little too strong for a newcomer. Austin had the look, the drive, and the fire, but Moody believed he also had an edge that made him difficult to approach. He said that Austin carried himself almost like someone who already had everything figured out, even though he was still in the learning stage. That kind of attitude did not sit well with the older wrestlers, and Moody was definitely one of them. One of the main things Moody pointed out was Austin's reaction to advice. Austin was talented, no doubt, but Moody thought he struggled to accept guidance from people who had been in the business much longer than him. According to Moody, if someone tried to point out something Austin could fix or improve, Austin did not always take it calmly. He would push back, get defensive, or brush it off. Moody believed this stubbornness made Austin come across as cocky rather than confident. Moody also talked about how Austin carried himself backstage. He said Austin was very serious and focused, which is not a bad thing, but it sometimes turned into distance. Austin did not socialize much with the others. He was not rude in a loud way, but he had a certain coldness, a wall that kept people at a distance. Moody felt that Austin wanted to project toughness and independence, but instead it made him seem unfriendly and hard to connect with. In the wrestling locker room, where respect and bonding are important, someone who keeps too much to themselves can easily be judged as arrogant. Another thing Moody mentioned was that Austin brought a kind of tension with him without even knowing it. His intensity made some people uncomfortable. Moody felt that Austin walked around like he had something to prove every single second, and that energy could overwhelm people. Moody always valued a calm, respectful backstage atmosphere, so Austin's presence made him uneasy during those early days. Even with all these issues, Moody still gave Austin credit where it was due. As Austin grew, he changed. He became easier to work with, more grounded, and far more polished. Moody always admitted that the superstar Austin eventually became was nothing like the rookie he first met. But those first impressions stayed with him. He remembered the young Austin as someone with amazing potential, but a rough attitude. And that early experience shaped Moody's opinion for many years. 4. Rick Rude. Rick Rude is an interesting case when it comes to Paul Bearer's stories. On one hand, Rude was the guy who helped Percy Pringle get connected to Vince McMahon, which eventually opened the door for him to become Paul Bearer in the WWF. Moody always acknowledged that and even appreciated it. But at the same time, he never hid the fact that their relationship in the territories was far from perfect. They worked together for a long time, but Moody often said there was real friction between them long before either of them reached the big time. Moody explained that Rick Rude was a very intense person, both in the ring and backstage. Rude carried himself with a seriousness that could easily turn into tension if someone said the wrong thing or gave the wrong reaction. Moody respected Rude's work ethic, but he also felt that Rude could be extremely stubborn. According to Moody, once Rude made up his mind about something, it was almost impossible to change it. That led to arguments and disagreements because Moody was also a strong personality. Two people who both want things their way will always clash sooner or later. Another thing Moody mentioned was that Rude had very high expectations of everyone around him. Rude trained hard, stayed in shape, and took the business seriously. He expected others to match that intensity. Moody often said that if someone was not working as hard as Rude thought they should be, Rude would let them know in a sharp and direct way. Moody sometimes ended up on the receiving end of that attitude, which created the tension between them. Moody felt that Rude did not always understand how to deal with people who were not wired exactly like him. Their disagreements were not always dramatic, but they were constant enough that Moody remembered them years later. Moody said there were times Rude questioned his decisions or complained about certain things during their time working together. Rude was very protective of his image and his character, so if he felt something did not fit his presentation, he had no problem arguing about it. Moody respected the passion, but he also grew tired of the constant push and pull. What added another layer to their complicated relationship was the fact that they still relied on each other professionally. Moody helped guide Rude early in his career, and Rude trusted Moody enough to recommend him to Vince McMahon later on. That kind of connection can create strange feelings. There is respect, but also frustration, appreciation, but also annoyance. Moody admitted that he never hated Rick Rude, but he definitely found him difficult to deal with during their territory days. Over time, both men moved on to bigger things, and their careers took different paths. Moody always gave Rude credit for helping him reach the WWF, but he also never sugarcoated the past. He told the truth as he experienced it. To him, Rick Rude was someone incredibly talented and incredibly driven, but not always easy to work with. Their time together was filled with both respect and conflict, and that mix stayed with Moody long after those early days were over. So that is it for today's video, and if you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss anything new.